I've suffered no discrimination over what's a fairly lengthy career in a number of organisations.
Colleagues at work, I generally don't have a problem with. No one has ever said anything to me directly.
I think I've been very lucky because I personally don't think I've experienced any homophobia or harassment because of my sexuality in the workplace.
I've never personally experienced any discrimination in my workplaces, and I am not aware of colleagues who've suffered any serious discrimination.
Everyone I've met since moving has accepted me for who I am.
I was very lucky with work in that, I worked for a London-based company, young, educated people. People were fine about me being gay.
It's great that people are treated equally in the workplace, regardless of their sexual orientation. But it's not like that for everyone. People are still being harassed and discriminated against. A recent survey found that only 52% of gay men and 51% of lesbians can be completely honest about their sexuality with their work colleagues. In the same survey, 9% of male respondents and 12% of female respondents reported that they had been harassed at work during the previous 12 months. Despite these figures, surprisingly few employment tribunal claims have been made. This DVD, funded by the Department for Community and Local Government, is part of a project run by the National Law Centres Federation. Its aim is to make people aware of the help that local law centres, such as this one in Southwark, can provide if you need to assert your rights at work. Further modules of the DVD will look at what the law covers, how to recognise if you are being discriminated against or harassed in the workplace because you are lesbian, gay or bisexual, and what your options are to deal with it. The 2003 legislation is a great step forward. It reflects a more open society, changing attitudes, and acts as a catalyst for social change.
I think that people often assume that legislative change follows social change, but I think that often the drivers are the other way around, and that if you change the law, people respond to that.
There were frequently homophobic comments made usually about gay men.
A parent complained that her daughter was being taught by a lesbian. The head decided to send a letter back to the parent saying that she would make sure that as a supply teacher I didn't teach her daughter again.
I have two customers at the moment who are both teachers, both working in Catholic schools, and they feel very threatened and in fear of their jobs if they come out.
I just said, do you know any gay people? And she said, no, I don't. And I said, well, you're looking at one now. And she said, oh, I always thought you were a bit weird, now I know why.
So clearly there is a problem. Although many gay people have good experiences in the workplace, others are still being treated unfairly. The regulations, which came into force in December 2003, made it unlawful to discriminate against workers on the grounds of sexual orientation. But there is a question: how many people know about the law and how well is it understood?
Do you know anything about the 2003 anti-discrimination law?
Not really.
I don't.
Is it in England?
Yeah, in England, yeah.
What have they said about it? No, I don't. I didn't know they had one.
People in the workplace, such as employers, are not able to discriminate against people because of their sexuality.
Not that much, apart from the fact that you cannot discriminate against anybody of their sexual orientation. That's about as much as I know.
So what is discrimination and who is covered by the law? We asked Declan O'Dempsey, a barrister practising in employment law, to explain.
The sexual orientation regulations cover basically anybody who's discriminated against on the grounds of sexuality. So that will cover heterosexuals, lesbian, gay, bisexuals. Any worker in England, Scotland, Wales will be covered by the legislation. Transgender people are protected by certain amendments to the Sex Discrimination Act and also by the Gender Recognition Act of 2004. Discrimination means either direct discrimination, indirect discrimination, victimisation or harassment, and direct discrimination occurs where the employer treats the employee less favourably than he actually treats another member of staff, for example, whose circumstances are the same apart from the issue of sexual orientation. Examples of direct discrimination would include discrimination in recruitment, so failing to appoint somebody to a job, things like dismissing somebody from a job on the grounds of their sexuality, not giving training or promotion on those grounds, giving worse terms and conditions and that sort of thing. And then after employment is finished, giving poor references. Lesbian, gay and bisexual workers will be entitled to the same benefits such as pensions, insurance, private healthcare, bereavement leave, adoption leave and the like, or even including things like invitation to social events. Indirect discrimination occurs where an employer imposes a provision or a criteria or a practice, but it puts the persons of a certain sexual orientations at a particular disadvantage when compared to others who aren't of that sexual orientation. Harassment occurs when the employer or one of the workers engages in unwanted conduct which is based on a worker's actual or perceived sexual orientation and which has as its purpose or its effect either violating the person's dignity or creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating or even an offensive environment for the person. And whether or not any form of behaviour will be considered to be harassment will depend on the circumstances of the case, including the perception of the person who's on the receiving end. The kinds of things that fall under the concept of harassment could include a particularly offensive one-off jest, for example, like bullying, name-calling. It'll cover things like teasing, and it doesn't necessarily have to be targeted at an individual. It could be just that there are homophobic jokes told around the office. It's going to cover also things like sexual advances, so sexual behaviour at work may amount to harassment in itself if it fulfills the criteria. And it'll also include the deliberate outing of somebody who doesn't want to be outed. Now, victimisation means that you're treated less favourably than others who are in the same circumstances as you, because you've done what's called a protected act. Now, a protected act means either making a complaint at work or intending to make a complaint at work about sexual orientation, discrimination or harassment. There's no particular formality about the concept of making a complaint about sexual orientation, discrimination at work. What has to be clear from the complaint is that you're complaining about treatment which is based on sexual orientation and the employer punishes you in some way for making that complaint. And in those circumstances you can bring a complaint for victimisation. So the most straightforward example, I guess, would be someone who is denied promotion because they gave evidence at the tribunal of a colleague who brought a sexual orientation complaint against the organisation.
In summary, that's what the law is about. Later on in this DVD, you will find the full interview with Declan and more information. The law provides a clear definition of unacceptable behaviour and a framework for dealing with discrimination and harassment.